And we should be live. So let me share my screen. Let's get that going. So welcome everyone to the PHP Cape Town meetup for Feb 2021. It's been quite a while since we had the last one. You can blame me for that. I'm not John Bossinger, as it might say that I am Nick. I'm just stealing John's account, or rather, he so generously donated it for the purpose of this meetup, as he's the wonderful co-host in this union of PHP Cape Town. So here you should be seeing my roadmap for tonight. Intro, we're here. I'm just going to tell you guys what's going to go on. After that, I'm going to mention what we're going to do with swag, because obviously with online, swag hasn't been the most abundant in all these online meetups in the last year. Then we've got two talks for you tonight, two great talks. First up will be Jonathan Dell with Cultivating DevOps Culture. So we're going to have some fun there, learning some extracurricular activities from our normal PHP lives. Then after maybe a bit of Q&A there, we will have John Rue with Laravel API Testing with OpenAPI. I hear there's quite a lot of material there, but John has been ruthless in editing it down and coming up with the right questions to help people out if they need some help. Then we've got a special announcement after that. I think people will like it. Some of you may know what it already is, but we'll get to it. And then lastly, we're going to have our usual raffle. As with last time, I'm going to box it to people who have participated in the chat, in the YouTube chat. So I'll pick one of you at random, and I will let you know where to contact so we can get you that license for any JetBrains program for 1 year. So without further ado, let's get started. You ready there, Jonathan?
Sure. Can you see the screen, the slides?
Yeah, I can do it. Should be showing up now.
Is it showing?
Yeah, it's looking good.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a bit about DevOps culture. This is not a technical talk at all. There's going to be a little bit of technical information, but not a technical talk. I'm not going to explain what it requires to be a DevOps engineer, because that is a role on its own. We're specifically going to be targeting DevOps culture. So a little bit about me. I'm a full stack developer at IO. I do development within the IDO team, where we build platforms in the health tech industry. I'm a mentor for the IO intern program, and I'm also the evangelist involved in cultivating DevOps culture across our teams. At IO, we design, build, scale digital products for a range of client sizes. Our main stack includes Laravel and Vue. So I'm going to start off with the biggest farce. You don't know Linux, so you can't do DevOps. I'm pretty sure a lot of developers feel this internally, and a lot of managers also think this, but DevOps has few things to do actually with Linux operating. You don't need to be a system administrator to do DevOps. And I'm going to show you throughout this talk how you can change your mindset of DevOps as an engineer to DevOps as a culture. So a little bit about DevOps, where DevOps is a combination of practices and tools designed to increase the team or organization's ability to deliver applications and services. So essentially, we want to think like a development team and solve like an operations team. And the opposite is true. Sometimes you want to think like an operations team and you want to solve like a development team. DevOps teams are autonomous, accountable, and always delivering. The team should have autonomy to solve their internal DevOps requirements or stumbling blocks as and when they encounter them. Every member of a team that embraces DevOps as a culture should be accountable to each other. This includes challenging each other on ideas. When a team is autonomous and accountable, they will naturally deliver quality and functional code. Sounds a lot like Agile, right? DevOps is Agile methodology applied beyond the software development lifecycle. So let's delve a little bit into the DevOps methodology. We'll start with continuous planning. Communication through continuous and collaborative planning is the backbone of a DevOps culture. More often than not, technical and non-technical people speak different languages. By defining clear, concise tasks and goals, we can anticipate the usual pitfalls of speaking past each other. Defining constantly evolving development processes that remove the craft of continuous development, processes that adhere to clearly defined team standards and efficient processes. From testing, trust in our code and deployments is built through testing. Continuous testing is achieved through automation. Automation is achieved through clearly defined processes. Now all these methodologies are really starting to build up towards a complete overall process. Continuous deployment, we want to push early and deploy often. Small, frequent iterations of deployable code will save you from a mad rush to push out deliverables. And then finally, continuous monitoring, have the right tools in place to flag issues early, and monitoring to confirm that we have the right things in the right places. Do not wait to be notified of an issue by a human. We are most often the least reliable source of information, and I think everybody can attest to this. Okay, but you don't know where to start. So there's a few things that we can start with. Let's start with visualizing our internal processes, or CI/CD. What does our day-to-day internal processes look like? Now take those processes, start with the most laborious of the lot, and break it down step by step. What makes our processes so manual? Is there a better way to do things? So we've identified a process, we've broken it up into smaller, more manageable chunks. How do we better it? Through automation. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit high-level overview of our current CI/CD within our team. We have our development environments, which try and look exactly the same as our production environment. We have code quality tools. We have GitLab, which is the heart and mind between everything. We have our test suites. We have some maintenance tasks. And then, of course, we have our build, release, and deployment steps within these pipelines. So one thing that I found throughout my career that is most often than not neglected within a team is keeping our applications up to date and secure. Up to date in the sense that we want to keep our dependencies updated, because security patches are released on a daily basis. If you don't have a security patch inside in your application, it makes it vulnerable to that vulnerability. So let's take a look at just this process. How do we ensure that our code is maintained and secured? Now, I know a lot of you might recognize the first two icons, Composer and NPM. And the third one is Trivy. Trivy is an open source layer scanning tool created by Aqua Security. What it does is it will scan your Docker images layer by layer, identifying vulnerabilities within, and it matches it against a vulnerability database. So how do we automate this process? So for our team, what we've done is we have a scheduled task on GitLab that runs. It will check out our branch. It will do a composer update. It will literally just do the log file update. It won't do any installations, no nothing. We just want our log files to have the latest updates. And then once these updates are done, it will then kick off a maintenance job for our security scanner to scan a built Docker image from OS level to packages to even your applications packages. So if you have a composer.lock or a package log file, it will scan those log files as well for any vulnerabilities. And I want to actually show you guys we have how we kick it off. So this is our schedules for our team, and this is our daily maintenance. And if I go and just kick this off, oh, wrong one. So while this is kicking off, it will go and check out the branch, then do the composer update, and then after it will create a new branch for us that we just tag with auto DevOps. That branch will then contain all updates. The merge request will be created. The merge request will then run the test suites. So the test suites will actually tell us, is our application broken after we've done our dependency updates? If it's not, it will automatically merge it, and that will be available for developers to merge from develop into their feature branches. So we can see it's doing a few things. It's gone and created a merge request for us. So if we just go check the merge request, now that merge request has been created and it's already running code sniffer and PHP unit against it. And this is one of the most manual tasks completely automated, and it doesn't take a systems administrator to get these kind of things set up. Right, so now we have an example of what we can do. So how do we identify what we are doing the right things? There's a lot of metrics that you can measure a team's DevOps performance by, but I'm going to speak about the 4 most crucial ones, and that is deployments. What is our deployment frequency? Changes, the lead time to changes. Recoveries, how quickly do we recover from failures? And then our change rate in failures. So just give you guys another example of our internal team. This little red arrow is where we started. We realized that we have a problem with our deployments. We were maybe doing a deployment once a week or once every 2 weeks. So we really needed to up our game. And these were only deployments to staging. So we identified, we disassembled our processes, and then by the time we had really smoothed out our DevOps processes, our deployment rate skyrocketed. And we can see we've reached a nice plateau where we actually deploy every day, sometimes maybe hourly. So the second metric is lead time to changes. It's all about planning, coding, testing, deploying, and then monitoring, and then repeating that cycle. How long does it take us to get stuff from the backlog into our sprint and then deployed? Does it take us years? Does it take us months, weeks, days, or hours? This ties in with the deployment frequency as well. We want to do these things quicker and faster and more often. Then second last one is the mean time to recovery. We broke production on a Friday, and everybody knows the situation. So how quickly can we get back to a workable state? Do we need to click a revert button? Do we need to notify sysops to deploy a different image? Who do we need to get involved? What do we need to do to get back to a working state? And then the final metric that we're going to use is, what is our change and failure rate? How often do we introduce regressions with changes? Are we fixing one bug but introducing 5? Are we letting a feature out, but it's causing other things in the system to break? And this really comes back to our continuous testing. Our continuous testing, our regression testing will pick up these things. The more we focus on those methodologies, the less failures we're going to see and less regressions we're going to see in our application. Cool. So I'm ready to take a couple of questions.
Awesome. So there's going to be a bit of a stream delay before any user questions come in. But yeah, it's interesting. I've seen this implemented a few different ways in a few different organizations, but the broad strokes are there. Like all companies that want to do this try and do these sorts of things. Whether it's like depending on how much control they get over this. So I'm keen to see how everyone approaches it. Because for example, where I'm at right now, we don't bother with self-hosting so many things of this,
Mm.
but we do use like a service called Buddy and attached things like that.
That's the thing, is like there are so many different ways that you can do implementations, and there's no one fit solution for everybody. Every team needs to figure out their own processes.
Yeah. This thing. So, waiting on some questions there in the chat. In the meantime, John, anything? What's your approach to this in the freelance life?
Yeah, I'm a big fan. As long as like the more time in the freelance life that I can spend working on a product and the less that I can spend dealing with issues is always a win. Like, I'm a huge fan of push to deploy always. How like push fast and small. Hugely valuable. I've been looking at using a couple of tools like Lasso and things like that as well, just to move a lot of the build processing away from on the server, but more into your pipeline.
It's definitely been a boost for us, is doing all our building in the pipeline. So our build release deploy processes, that builds is literally just checking out the branch, building a Docker image from it. Releasing would be just tagging the image, and then deploying would just be setting the pods on AWS to that image. And it sped up everything. We are deploying our projects in a matter of minutes.
So I think on that,
Yeah.
Zaki's question in the chat is pretty pertinent here. How much end-to-end testing do you do?
So interesting question. We have recently started using Cypress to do our end-to-end tests. So we're very new with it, but it is completely integrated into our CI/CD. So we use Cypress only on our front-end applications. So we have an API that's built in Laravel, and then we have a couple of front-end applications. And these front-end applications obviously talk with the API. So our Cypress is run on our front-end applications. And as soon as a merge request comes in, or for those that use GitHub, a pull request comes in for the develop branch. So from a feature branch to a develop branch, it will run our entire suite of end-to-end tests against the entire application.
I see, yeah.
So I see there was another question. Do you have any suggestions for people who are only able to deploy at specific timeframes? No. It's you don't. So if you're talking about, you can only deploy once a week. So the client has a requirement deploying once a week. It helps having different environments to deploy to. So if we use our staging as always a branch that we can deploy to at any stage, but a production environment, that has release cycles. Our staging environment, if there's a feature that we've built and we want to get it tested, we push it out there. But it all depends. Like, you have to really figure these things out internally. Like, how many times do you want to deploy? How many times do you want eyes to be able to see actually what the work that you've been doing? Your QA people, the more you deploy, especially to staging, the more your QA personnel are going to love you. Because the quicker it is for them to get eyes on it, it's quicker for them to identify bugs. And in the same sense, it's going to be easier for you then, because you're not waiting until a product release date until you actually figure out, oh, well, we've got 5 bugs to fix before we get to production. You can then deploy to production semi-bug free. You're not always going to be bug free.
Yeah, 100%. I especially agree with the QA and pushing to staging part. I was going to say the same. If you can't do atomic deployments, and you have to do these weekly or bi-weekly things, I've been part of that. It's sometimes rough. So having that staging environment, especially if you have QA people, is valuable, because then you can still implement a lot of this. And at the very least, I think, I mean, you'll have to confirm here, the response time to actual queries for hotfixes can still follow all this entire process. There can still
100%.
be this side channel to actually like use this in the atomic manner we're talking about that a lot of companies do.
No, 100%. So we have this. We have a life cycle that our developers are working branch. So anything we've got merge requests coming from feature branches into our working branch. Staging we handle as our internal testing. So if staging is broken, it's broken. We can fix it, but we don't want UAT or production to be broken, because that's client facing. So if we have a scenario where we need to hotfix something, we create a hotfix branch for it. We get it into develop, and then we just, instead of just pushing everything that we currently have to develop, we'll just create a hotfix, a cherry-picked merge request for that hotfix into our staging environment. If it's working there, then we can use that cherry pick to just deploy it to UAT or production if needed.
Yeah, that definitely works great. I see there's a lively discussion also happening in the chat. Some great suggestions there.
Yeah.
On what you can do on a technical level, like with that GitLab and the pipelines, like Brad's saying.
No, and 100%. It's and again, like Brad said, like you can use manual jobs. It doesn't need to be automated. It just needs to take the manual labor out of your processes. So clicking one button is better than going and doing 100 things manually. If you just have that little bit of automation to set up a task for you to click a button, that's already DevOps. Then you're already heading in the right direction.
Exactly, yeah.
So I see Andres also asking, I'm a big fan of automation from inception of a project. I think it's important for development environment, mimics the production environment. Very. It purely comes back to that it was working on my machine. If your production environment is containerized, there's no reason not to have your local environment containerized either. You can have it almost look exactly the same.
That's another good use case for having your dev server or your staging server as well. No one can complain that something went to production and then broke. If you're always pushing to your dev or staging server, it's another good intermediary testing point.
100%.
Cool. I don't see many more questions on this, so I think that's all for the questions on that.
I just want to answer Andre on that last one. I've seen some weird things happen between Mac and Windows and Linux. This is why you use Docker.
Just like Zach is saying,
Yeah.
Yeah, Dom saying the rule of thumb, not mimic, but match prod as close as possible. It's sometimes easier said than done, but yeah.
But I think Docker has come a long way, and we have technologies available to us. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it was a mission to get environments looking exactly the same, local versus production. But now you have the tools. You've got Docker Desktop, you have Docker Compose. The tools are there to make your life easier. And these tools are not hard to use. It's not back in the day where you had to manually go and link your containers. Now you have tools to easily get those things done.
Yeah, so much more tooling now. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Should
Let's
do
see,
everything manually.
Zaki.
There's another one there. Yeah.
Well, what do you do on large DB changes that take 30 minutes to apply, aka big data? So I'm not sure about the question. Are you talking about data changes or structure changes? Because the two is different. If it's data changes, then honestly I don't know how to answer that. But structure changes are pretty easy, and any modern framework will give you the tools that you need to perform migrations, and migrations don't necessarily need to take that long. Also, this comes into deploying more often. Like if you're going to deploy once a year, I'm assuming your migrations are going to be quite a large set. But if you're deploying constantly, then you have these small incremental changes that you can also quickly roll back on.
Yeah, I was talking about structure changes. They like on billions of rows. It is quite a toughie.
Yeah, that is a tough one. Yeah, I don't have an absolute answer for you on that, because billions of rows that's quite big. But like I said, try and minimize how many changes you make at once. Like if you and deploy more often, especially if it comes to trying to change the structure of a database that big.
It also depends on if that change is backwards compatible or not. If you're adding a column
Yeah.
and that code hasn't actually been shipped yet because the migration is still happening and you're running atomic deploys, then it won't actually have any impact. So if you're running with atomic deploys where you actually only swap the code out once the code is fully finished all those pipeline builds, then you can have zero downtime whilst having a change like that. So if, say, you've got a 30-minute structural change that's going to happen, and you don't want to run that, like if it's data changes, you could do that as like a command that you run manually or something like that as well, if you want to take that more manual. But like if it's a structural change, if you make it backwards compatible or have a check for it beforehand, then that actually doesn't necessarily have to have any downtime whatsoever. That does then obviously require more code and potentially several releases, where you end up having one release doing a doing some extra work so that it works beforehand, and then you do the actual change, and then maybe afterwards, a day later, you ship another deploy which does a cleanup process of the other stuff, and that way you've actually got a fully backwards compatible over the several deploys, and you can ensure there was no downtime whilst also ensuring that everything gets migrated properly.
So just running your changes in parallel with what you've currently got.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you do a database a structural change, and that breaks your old code, like if your old code breaks because of the new change, that's a problem. If you ensure that a full production deploy with the new structure won't actually break anything, and then 2 deploys later you can clean up all the old things, and you do that temporary kind of phasing, then you can ensure there's no downtime whatsoever.
This is also what backups are for. Remember.
Yeah, you don't want to have to be running a backup. That's not meant to be the ideal solution.
I mean, it's a solution for some scenarios, but yeah, I think when it comes to really databases that big, it becomes an issue. Just wanting to refer back to backups.
Oh yeah, if spinning up a new snapshot of your database takes an hour, then using a backup as a resolution is definitely not your no downtime resolution option.
Yeah. I think, yeah, lively discussion. I'm loving it. So thank you very much, Jonathan. Awesome talk on DevOps culture. I love all the participation I'm seeing from everyone. As you can see on the screen, Jonathan works at IO. We're looking for a full stack. Check it out because Jason is lovely. So go have a look. Thanks. So I'll just repeat once again, since I was a bit hasty. On the swag situation, I have posted a link in the chat. So now comes John Rue with OpenAPI testing in Laravel.
Alrighty, can you guys see me okay?
Are you fine? Yeah.
Sweet. I'm John. This is me. I do freelancing work, PHP generally, Laravel, bit of DevOps, CTO for hire type work. I'm currently fully booked, but thank you for asking. I'm on Tech, and you can catch me around. I'm very involved. Most importantly for you guys, I'll be a noisy ear distraction for the next 15 minutes or so. So we're talking about, what's this talk about? It's about OpenAPI testing. So if you're not already familiar with OpenAPI, Swagger is the original conception behind OpenAPI, and OpenAPI is the new name that Swagger is effectively morphed into. If you're not using Swagger, why? If you're not using any OpenAPIs, I'm not going to use this talk to change your mind. That's another whole talk, which you're welcome to, but that's not this talk. This talk is how we actually get some cool benefits from using OpenAPIs to make our testing life a lot easier. For those of you that do use OpenAPI in the chat, do you guys do it completely, or how in depth do you go in your OpenAPI documentation? Do you give schema examples? Do you ensure that all of your responses are there? Do you only give your success or only a generic failed? Do you have a 404? Do you have a 403 or 401s? How granular do you go in your API testing? And is there really any gain? Like, is it worth it? Because that just sounds like a lot of effort for not much gain if people are using it normally. So yeah, one of the things I've really enjoyed with OpenAPI docs is when you're doing the testing with them, it actually ensures that your docs are always up to date as well. So if you deploy new docs with your code and your tests test both the docs and your code matching those docs, that ensures that your docs are always up to date. Which is really nice. So if you have any incorrect API docs, that's actually a problem, and that'll stop your deploy. Which, if you're running those nice automated deploys, it's nice and quick and easy. So I'm not really going to go into this much, but if you're having a nice internal standardized API, so if you're using a tool like Fractal or something like that to have a good view layer on top of your API, it makes testing your API, it makes API documentation in general a ton easier. So basically just having transformers to transform the data always into set formats. So you always have consistent responses throughout all your APIs. If you want to have a look at those, check out Dingo or check out the Laravel 5 repository pattern. Those are pretty good. But yeah, so this isn't the silver bullet for API entity testing. It's not going to be automatic. There's not going to be a click of the button and everything just happens because you are irreplaceable. No. I don't think we're actually going to get there for a good while because it's often contextual. Testing isn't just a click at the button. You often need to have some business logic attached in there. But what this does do, it's not the silver bullet, but what it does do is it makes it a heck load easier to ensure that all of your basic tests run really easy. And when I say really easy, I actually forgot some of the API endpoint testings for this talk, and I did it in like a minute and a half. Did like 3 whole endpoints for the whole thing. Super, super quick. And that's the big benefit that I find for this, on top of the fact that your API docs are tested. So there's some prerequisites. The top 2 links here are for how to do OpenAPI docs. This is for Laravel specific, and this is just the PHP generic one. At this point, for the testing, you should have a API JSON file somewhere, which has that OpenAPI spec. If you don't, have a look at these 2. If you do, then these 2 are the ones we're going to be chatting about. The good news for the PHP specific people, or the not Laravel specific people, is that it does all run on core PHP. It's not Laravel specific, but all the nice helper stuff that I built out is PHP specific. And it's not just me. Most of it actually wasn't my work. I just forked someone else's repo. So yeah, let's get into it. There are a couple issues before I jump in too deep. And all those issues are actually with the core PHP one. It doesn't support the full OpenAPI spec yet. The full OpenAPI spec is pretty large. So there are a couple of issues, but it's been incredibly stable in my usage of it so far. And it's being worked on pretty decently. So a lot of those issues you probably won't notice. When it comes to some of the Laravel specific performance improvements, which are large, there are 1 or 2 things to be aware of, but the likelihood is that those shouldn't be an issue either. So yeah, performance improvements. I got the performance pretty speedy, so it always really irks me when tests take a long time. I mean, a long time, like 30 seconds is far too long for automated tests to run in, I think, at least for smallish to medium-sized apps. So as a good example, I'm going to show you a little demo later, but I spun up a new little product this week. It's got 17 endpoints, run through more than 32 tests, and it takes 1.7 seconds to complete the whole thing. So that's the kind of scale we're looking at here. An existing app that I have with a whole lot more endpoints and a lot more business logic is a 7-second full PHP unit end-to-end tests. And that's testing all of your API endpoints against all of the API documentation, ensuring the response types, ensuring all the response data, which is pretty tasty. But on performance improvements, there's a lot of stuff that you can squeeze out there if you need. Alrighty, so demo time. Let's see if this will burn in fire. So we have here a pretty basic Laravel app. I've got the OpenAPI tests going there, and otherwise it's pretty normal. I'm running Nova, I'm running Horizon, and there you can actually see that Swagger package. If you look at my controller, it's a pretty normal controller. I'm not using single action controllers here. You got your index, you've got your show, you've got a scrape method. So over here, you can see these annotations to make that API spec. You run through what the things are. You do the parameters. So you can add references and when you're doing annotations, and this could be its own whole talk on how to do annotations properly in PHP. And the TLDR of a lot of it is you can make sure that your actual annotations are very dry. So in this use case, they're all actually responding very clearly with one card object. So here's an object, you make an object of type card. You say what required fields it has, those could be useful later. And that's pretty much that. And then you say there's a card collection, and that card collection has a whole lot of cards. Cool. So that's what the controllers look like. And then from that, you end up with some Swagger docs. So Swagger UI, which is built into that Darkula package, which is pretty nice. So these are little Swagger docs. We can see here you get a card, those available parameters, pagination things, and for including things via transformers. And you can see the response will be a card collection, which looks something like that. You can look at the schema. You can actually see the required options there as well. Okay, so that's if it's a success 200. If it's a 401, you will get an unauthorized with a certain message string. So you guys have hopefully seen something like that before. Those are your pretty normal Swagger docs. Nothing too fancy there. If we look in Postman, you can do a little login, and we can do an index call, and you can see the index call, and you can see if I scroll at the bottom, there's all that pagination info. And so like there are a couple cards here with a fair amount of data. And doing a show call obviously works as well. So if we now actually run the tests, boom. And no, that wasn't a joke. That is 2 seconds for the entire end-to-end test suite. So you don't believe me? I believe, I know that you don't believe me. So let's go and add something into our transformer. So this is the transformer for the cards. So we'll see here if I do that change, and then if I go to the postman, you'll see now we've got some new stuff, right? But that's not in our API docs, right? We haven't changed our annotations at all. So this info should throw us an error. And boom, just like that, you get non-match properties. That stuff wasn't defined in your schema. So just like that, I can show you that it actually is testing all of them. If you don't believe me, we can do a couple more and check it out. But this is actually going through every single one of those endpoints and doing all of those tests, confirming that the response type matches. So there's not a retailer, there's not a product, and there was that new stuff that we've already seen, which is pretty hectic. So what these tests do, let's have a look at the test. So we go to the card show test, right? What have we got here? We've got a success test. It creates a user, it creates a card, and then it says this requester with method with path, and you passes. So this is Laravel-esque, passing through our route for that card, and you're passing through the card's key. Saying act as user, and then these are the important ones here. So this actually will validate the request according to what the Swagger request for this is. It'll send the request and it'll validate the response. So another way I can show you this is if I go to my tests, let's go to the register test. So we go to the register test and the success, this has some with request body stuff. So if we run these, I should actually clean up the other stuff first here. Let me just uncomment those so things are running cleanly. Ensure that's all happy. And if we go to our register test and we don't actually send through the password confirmation, you'll see it throws an error, not because Laravel failed, but because it failed before it even hit the sending request. So this failed because your request data that you were sending in didn't match the required Swagger request data. So in the Swagger, those things are all required for part of the request, and you didn't pass those, so you get an invalid status code, which is very cool. So it's the request layer, and then it sends off the request, and then it validates the response. And this validate response will require a certain status back. So if you're validating that this must be an unprocessable entity, right? Or if this must be a HTTP created, or whatever your Swagger docs over here have. So that was the register call. So you see here you got your 201, that's your created, your 401, and your 422. So if we look back at the code, that's the 422. So ensure that this must match whatever Swagger says 422 says. So this here. So if that response that we get back from Laravel doesn't match this info here that in our Swagger doc says, then it'll throw an error. So you're actually doing that full request thing, and that's how it knows which of the response types in your Swagger to actually look for. And that's pretty much that. It works really well. I can show you another project over here, which is a little bit bigger. This one has a lot of extra migration. So that first project that I showed you, it's pretty much it's a very new project. There are not many migrations. There isn't that much efficiency that I've pushed through it. It's all on a MySQL database, and I can show you a bit of that in a sec, but it's not seeding much. Whereas this project actually got a lot of seeds. So we've got a database snapshot that it's running through. So it takes a while to start originally, but once it goes, it just smashes through all of those requests. 8 seconds for a full app with a lot of seeded data in there already and a ton of migrations. That's not too bad. So where are we? Yeah, that's pretty much that in a nutshell. I'll go back to my slides in a sec. Oh, what I do want to show you is how this actually knows what your API docs are. I'm extending for API test case. This is where I do some sneaky improvements. So I'm using the refresh test database, the refresh database, and I'm doing some performance improvements there. But this is the main call that actually does the setup. It's what loads the schema through. So that'll actually grab that schema doc and load it through and do all that stuff for you. But yeah. So if you wanted to add a new test, it is incredibly easy just to add a new test, because most of the time, if your Swagger doc's up to date, you just add the default stuff. You don't need to add any additional things. I do have a couple tests where I'm adding extra things. So if we look at it, most of the index calls, well, it's not used for index. If we go look at the card index, I'm validating, I'm doing some additional responses to do things. This is actually one of the situations where I can't actually validate the response currently because that package doesn't yet support one of the ways that I'm doing Swagger schemas, where we go multiple schemas. There's a PR for it. So all of this code here will be replaced just with this one line, and it'll be a lot better. But yeah, so that's pretty much how that goes. It was a little bit quicker than planned, but yeah, thanks for listening. If there are any other cool topics on this, if you want to do a deep dive into the performance improvements, that getting things down to a 2-second full test time, which is pretty crazy, API boilerplates, or how I can do these talks in general better, let me know. Otherwise, over to you for Q&A, Nick.
Cool. So first of all, would you mind posting those GitHub links in
Yes.
the chat?
I will share the full slides in the thing afterwards, in the meetup group, if that helps.
Awesome. So there are a few questions already. I've pre-warmed them up for you. Abdullah asks, is this the new stuff exclusive to Laravel or PHP specifically? I know you mentioned a
Yeah,
bit of this.
so it's not exclusive to Laravel. It is PHP based. So that package, the BGYP package, is a just generic PHP one. A lot of those quality of life, easy use things are Laravel specific. So whilst you can very much get it running in your PHP app in itself, you'll just have to do a bit of that groundwork. Like those last couple things that I clicked through, where you could see that it was doing some magic behind the scenes, that you'd have to build yourself in your own app. But the actual core of it, where it does the comparisons from your Swagger or your OpenAPI to your actual imitation, that is entirely PHP based, not Laravel specific. So you can get all of that value. You'll just have a little bit more wiggle room. Laravel just makes things nice and magic for those who use it. What is the support for Lumen? I haven't actually catered for Lumen at all in the little package. I don't think PyOnL, which is what I extended off, supported Lumen. You'll probably find that you can take it and push it through without much issues, but I haven't actually tested it at all. I don't find many people actually doing APIs on Lumen these days. Can we use a generated Swagger schema to test your non-PHP API? Yes, you could. So the PHP implementation is for the testing itself. It's not for the actual API. If your whatever API responds with that differently or better, that is perfectly fine. But all this work is specifically for the tests being PHP specific. You could very well get a non-PHP API fully tested like this. You won't be able to do anywhere near as many of the performance improvements. So like some of those performance improvements that are done on Laravel side are very specific to Laravel and to PHP. You can get a lot of them through, but not all of them. So a basic example is in those tests that you saw running there, it actually only spins up the Laravel framework app once, and then it runs all of those requests within it. Even though it's doing full API requests, it's not having to spin up the app each time, which does a huge amount of speed savings. And things like that, obviously, you wouldn't be able to get in the non-Laravel-esque side. You could probably get a Symfony equivalent, which wouldn't be bad, but yeah. What else is going on here? Did I go through anything too quickly? I did fly through a bit of the stuff there.
I'm sure more questions will come up, but I see you had some of your own Q&A
yeah.
there for some common things. I'm sure you can go through that.
Yeah. So it's a personal project, that first one that you saw. Why the heck did I bother writing tests for it? It's not mission critical. It's definitely not mission critical. The tests aren't there because I'm that scared of things breaking. The tests are there because they're so easy. It's a personal project that I'm getting a React dev to build the front end for. So having a API docs is really useful for them so that they can build their own front end, and we've got a good source of truth as to what they can connect to without me having to chat to them all the time. So I wanted the Swagger docs, and if you've got Swagger docs up and running, which isn't that hard, the basic boilerplate for it is very simple. Then adding those tests is a half-an-hour thing to write all of those tests, if not less. So that's very chilled. Haven't been a big fan of single action controllers. I've tried them out, but I've actually been preferring resource controllers. Have you guys used single action controllers a lot? Do you only use resource controllers, or do you just have 2,000 line controllers? What's the general verdict there in the comments?
Well,
I saw there was a
I can tell you from my experience, it's always been a mix and match situation. Sometimes you stick to single action, sometimes resources, sometimes it's just everything's in the controller. It's especially when you're dealing with a monolith, it really becomes difficult getting everybody to stick to one style.
For sure. What I've been trying to do is pull out all of my functionality into service methods. So your controller is actually pretty lightweight. Your controllers often just end up doing a couple of checks and then pushing everything through to the service methods.
Essentially, it should literally just be responsible to receiving the requests, doing some actionables, and then giving a response.
Yeah, 100%, yeah. I can actually have a look at that. Let's go to one of those controllers. Yeah, so a controller like this, I mean, it's what, 200 lines, and that's a bit long. But actually, 120 lines of it is annotations, and the rest of the controller is all just very chilled. So you just present your whatever you want to present with. Like the show method, I'm actually allowing 3 different types of IDs. You can use an ID or the Scryfall and Oracle ID, and that all but it's basically just very simple. Most of the actual work will all happen off other methods or services that run through. Yeah. One of the things I had here was doc blocks. I used to be a big fan of doc blocking everything. These days I just haven't really bothered. With the tests, I must say, if you're doing tests, it is incredibly useful to use groups with your tests. If you don't use groups and you're not sure why I'm saying that, what it lets you do is you can say, run me all the tests of group auth. And that only ran my auth tests. Or I can say, run me all the tests with group card. And that will only run all my card tests. So using groups I find really nice. So like those are not really doc blocks. Those are actionable actual annotations for things. Those I really enjoy. They make your life a lot better and a lot easier, especially if you do have a test suite which takes a long time to run. Being able to run specific groups is really nice. You can obviously also use the filter. So you can say filter for me, and we can say register test. and that would run all the tests within this class. But yeah, haven't been a big fan of doc blocks in general recently, especially with PHP 8. I haven't fully moved over yet, but with PHP 8 having a lot more support for the strict typing of returns and parameter values where you can have optionals, the doc blocks kind of fall away a little bit there, in my opinion.
Also, we've started using group annotations within our tests, especially for the monolith that is our API source of truth. Especially when you're working on a feature, you literally just want to see that feature's components, everything in that set works correctly. Just use the group.
100%, yeah.
And also, like you can define different test suites within your PHP unit configuration, but you can use your groups for that as well.
Yeah. And like if you've got multiple apps within the same app kind of thing, then using the test suite is really useful to have that separation. But most of the time, if you've got a single app, groups are great. But yeah.
Today I learned. So we do have a few questions for you there in the chat, John, if you want to take a look.
Yeah. I'm just going to keep sharing your guys' view here. That's a very interesting one, Brad. So I have never actually hit any documentation errors or missed test cases. And part of that is because I'm always using Fractal. So it'll be the exact same all the time. So all my view layers will look the same regardless of the data store that it's coming from. For some of the stuff, I have pulled through some production, well, not production data, but if I can actually show you over here, what this app does, this is the bigger one. If we go to its API test, I think, test case, yeah. If we go to this one, what I did for this is you effectively, as to start the test, instead of doing your default migrations and seeds for a database, instead you actually insert the database at a snapshot. So once every now and again, you take a snapshot of a database that you like of it. So you do all your migrations, you do all the seeds to that point, you take a snapshot of it, and then you actually just add that SQL as part of your test data. And when your test spins up, it first grabs that, actually runs that onto the database, so it ensures that you're running that version of the database. Then it runs any additional migrations or seeds that you might have done since then, and then runs your tests on that database. So doing something like this, it would be very easy to take a snapshot of production at one point and just dump in your snapshot of production over here and run that through. Whether you want to do that all the time or whether you want to do some pass-throughs, you can definitely do some cool options there. I've normally found doing sanitization of production data and passing that in is one of the nice options. So every now and again, you're just like, similar to how staging systems often work. If you've got a dev server and a staging server, what's really nice on staging is to actually get that production data in. You obviously don't want it to be unsanitized. So you have a pulled production data and you run a sanitization on it, so you don't have user emails or things like that showing through. And do that in your staging data, so you can get all that real life traffic. I like the idea. I'm not sure if doing that in all of your testings is useful. Doing a snapshot of production data every now and again for testing could be nice, though. That's not the worst option.
One of the things
Definitely quite an interesting one. Yeah.
So one of the things that we've done is we've classified our data into two different classifications: mutable and immutable data. So immutable data is data that stays constant. So your statuses, anything that's not really going to be changing. And then you have your mutable data, which is users or whatever that data that's constantly going to be have their CRUD processes run against them. And we use our production mutable data across our tests, but when it comes to immutable data across the test, and then when it comes to the mutable data, we just resort to using factories to create those on the fly.
Yeah, I ended up actually doing a similar thing for that first project that I was showing you there, where I had a split between some of them. Some of them you can't make with factories, and some of them you can make with factories, and pulling those through differently was very useful.
Yeah, that's the thing is sometimes you do need something to have a specific ID.
Yes, yeah, or a specific class name or something.
Yeah, no,
Like
100%.
that app that we had there, like it's got custom scrapers which will need a specific class. I can't randomly generate a class name that doesn't exist in my app or that doesn't match the interface. So yeah, 100%. Have I considered generating OpenAPI specs from doc blocks? So I assume you're talking about using the doc blocks in your model. And like, how to describe it? Docula allows you to do things like in your model, you can do a doc block for properties. If we go to a card, if you were to say your fillables or whatever, you could actually put in a thingy here, which says like properties or whatever. And that would grab through the properties automatically for you. And you don't have to do all of it as a dump like this. To be honest, I've never really enjoyed them that much because it ends up making your models very fragmented. What you end up with is you end up with doc blocks in a whole suite of places that aren't necessarily always relevant. So whilst I don't really like the controller being the place where I put the schema, I should probably actually move this to a presenter layer, not the controller layer. But I'm not a big fan of using that doc block in the, like using the property doc blocks. I don't know, it's just never really struck me as clean. I like all my API docs at the bottom as like all my code runs above, and that's all the practical things. And if you want to see implementation of that, then that's all below. So yeah, I'm aware that some people do that, and it is quite nice. It can make things a lot neater because it'll automatically know what you're working with a lot of the time. So as opposed to saying like a block like this with that property, you can just say the property, and then at the top of the model you have just that kind of thing. But yeah, it's definitely an option. Like there's never nothing against it. However you make your API docs is up to you. There are various ways, and I think that's one of the joys about the OpenAPI spec is there are so many different ways you could do it and still be really useful and programmatically sound, which is cool. But yeah.
Awesome.
I'm not entirely familiar with Gherkin, Rosie. So I'm not.
Yeah, to be honest,
sure
I've never heard of Gherkin myself. So I just did some quick duck going, and I found that package that I posted. And there are other examples there. So if you just search for OpenAPI and Gherkin, you'll find a lot of things there.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking about TDD as well. Very cool. People talk about, so you can do your tests first, but often it's actually nicer to do their documentation first. So if you do it this way with the TDD, you actually need to do your documentation first. And you document, okay, how must the API respond? What will my response objects be? And what will my request objects be? And once you do that, you make your test, which is just a breeze, and then you ensure that your result is the same. So like it very much doesn't hinder your TDD at all. You do just have to do documentation first, but I think if you're doing TDD, that kind of plan it beforehand is very much part of your mindset anyway. So I think it actually works pretty well.
So I've actually got a question for you, John.
Yeah.
So I noticed that you were doing some migrations in your testing there, right? How do you deal with having a separate database for your development and a database for your tests? Because migrations, you can't specify a database to run against. You can only specify a different connection. Do you create a specific connection for it to go run against?
You can specify a specific database.
Are you sure? Because it says DB, but it's referring to the connection string.
Yeah, so this will be the default database. So what I do is in PHP unit XML, you'll find here I specify a specific database for that.
Yeah.
So this won't run against the production database. This will run against a specific database for that. And the same with this project, I do a very similar thing. Oh, wow. I cannot type today. PHP unit XML. You'll see I keep the connection the same, and I change out the database to being a _test database. So currently, these apps don't have their tests running. Well, I mean, it is part of the pipeline, but it's part of the pipeline on the actual server, which isn't as ideal. So currently, I've literally got an extra database on that database server called _test, and this will run them against an actual production database that's just never used. If that makes
That's quite
sense.
interesting. Because
I do want to build this into the pipeline. You just then have to do the db create function in that pipeline to create that database. Yeah.
okay.
I'm not a fan of using SQLite for testing databases. The speed is not worth it. The speed is not worth the headaches of the migrations, because often you end up doing migrations which actually are MySQL specific. You want to change a column name? Guess what? SQLite doesn't support that. And a lot of things that just like databases are different. If you're wanting to do a lot of performance improvement things on your app, you will actually end up doing specific Postgres or specific MySQL implementations. And sometimes to get things really performant, you actually need to do DB raw statements. And like, yes, you can still use Eloquent or Doctrine or whatever you're using as your ORM, but if you're wanting to really squeeze the most out of your database, you will need to use the custom database tools that database provides. So yeah, I've pretty much only been burnt by SQLite. By SQLite testing databases. They have never really been a good, this is actually a production environment test. And like we were chatting about that earlier, how you want your development environment to be as closely in line with production as you can. Now, that's the exact same for testing in my mind. Why would you want to test against something that's different to production? You then push to production and production breaks because you didn't test the same thing as what you're actually putting the code onto. So whilst people use SQLite a lot for in-memory stores because it's really fast, there are plenty of other really good ways to get that performance improvement while still using an actual MySQL on disk's memory store. Like, I don't think that a 2-second test is a problem for a speed, and that's running an actual MySQL. So people who say that you can only use SQLite for testing, nah, bro, that's just not right.
It also breaks things down because now you've got two different database paradigms. And like I've been bitten by this directly. Like the very first time I tried to implement SQLite for a testing database or for a project that was normally using MySQL, it just broke. And I had to basically change the migration, which was one of those automatic SQL Alchemy migrations. This is a Python project. So now I have to go dive into that in code I barely know and change it and check, oh, are we in SQLite or are we in testing environment? Whichever version of that I can get, then change what I'm trying to do with migration and hope that it's still usable in the end.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's how I get around the environment problem, Jonathan. I know some people use your like different env for it, which is definitely an option. So one of the sneaky Laravel things, all right, so you saw me doing the testing there, and that was testing against an actual API. But one of the sneaky Laravel hooks that I've had to go is because it spins up one app, it's not spinning up an app to do the testing and then doing those external endpoints onto an API that doesn't know it's in testing mode. What it's doing is it's spinning up one testing app and doing internal routes for the API tests. So it doesn't need to change the actual like API side of things to use testing environment, if that makes sense. Because normally the problem is that you do a test and it does an external request to your API and your API doesn't know that that's actually a testing thing in that pipeline. So you can use like a env testing change thing, or you can use a connection change, which people generally do to get around it. But if you're actually only ever spinning up one Laravel instance of the app and you're doing internal routes, then you don't have that problem.
Yeah.
The only issue, while we're just on that, the only issue that I've potentially thought of, which could be a big problem there, is if you have a lot of custom bindings that you use. So if you purposefully in a lot of your requests have bindings that will change certain bindings, those could linger on after that request. So if I make a get cards request and a change to binding, and then I do a get product request, that binding is changed because you're still in the same app. But I think generally, if you're doing custom bindings and not cleaning up afterwards, you probably need to rethink how you're designing that code. Or at least in the test, just be aware of it and then change the binding at the end of the test cycle.
I
But
think the issue stems for us is, so we use a before first test hook on our test suite, which basically sets up our database for us. And then we use the database transactions trait within our test to just after each test, it just clears out and gets you back to that state that it was before it ran the test. And I think before test hook runs before the application Laravel has been set up within your test. So it doesn't actually know what environment it's running in. So you need to pass in these things. And a lot of, you can pass in env on your commands, which sets it to the correct environment. But migrate for Laravel does not respect env on the migrations command. So what we've resolved to doing is, it does take in a database flag, which you can specify a connection to use. And then in our config, we have a separate config for the test database that I'll just use then.
yes, yeah. I remember this. I can't remember entirely how it got around it though. I think it's either a situation of the app spinning up. I know that for all of these, by the way, I'm not using transactions. These are doing a full database refresh between every single one of those tests, which people normally don't like doing because of performance. But if I run this, I'll prove you otherwise again.
It's all dependent on how much setup you need between tests.
Yes, 100%, yeah. But I mean, so this project here, this is doing a full dump between each one. And you can, so if you're in Laravel specific, you can do a lot of sneaky hooks for that. And that's where that snapshotting makes a huge difference. Pulling from a snapshot versus doing all of your migrations and seeds is a huge difference. This overriding the default refresh test database makes a world of difference for speed. And yeah, this is currently doing a full refresh database between each test case. And it's still able to get pretty performant. So the start of the test, it actually does a DB wipe, and then it does the migrate. And I think doing it like this was maybe how I got around the env issue, because this is only called from a lot afterwards. It's called once all the env stuff is spun up. I can't remember entirely though. I remember seeing that issue and getting around it without having to do the config change.
Yeah.
And I think it was just because I swapped out from using the transactions using the refresh database.
Yeah, I think, like I said, our issue is that because we're setting everything for the test suite up right before everything has been initiated, it doesn't even know about Laravel. It just knows we need to execute this command.
Yeah. But yeah.
Great stuff. I'm always a fan of anything that helps us to keep testing, especially with these darn APIs.
Yeah.
At some point, you come 5 years down the line, you've got a legacy API, you can barely test it, you're 5 versions behind. And
100%. And API docs is something that we often never think about much, but that our actual users, so if you're building a SaaS app, like your actual consumers are going to be using that API to build out their systems. Having an API that doesn't necessarily match the spec is one of the most frustrating things in the world, apart from having to deal with SOAP APIs. And like having the surety that whenever you push your code, your API docs are also perfectly accurate for what it says is incredibly useful in that sense. Takes it one step forward. Not only is my code perfectly tested, or my code is completely tested and working as expected, but also what I'm telling you to use is how you expect it to be used.
Exactly, yeah. That's lovely. I think, yeah, I haven't seen many more questions come up so far, so I think that's about it for that. Unless there's anything else you want to mention, John? Last words?
Do I have some more slides? Oh, there are a lot of Chrome tabs there. Let's just go up. No, that's it. Thanks all for listening. And scream if you want to hear more about any of the other things.
Awesome stuff. Thanks for the talk, and Jonathan, some awesome things tonight. So we have 2 more orders of business left, which I'll get to now. First, we have a special announcement which I'm about to make. So, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's been a while since we had the last meetup. Life catches up, especially at that time of the year. It's a slow start because we've all been on holiday and eating our Christmas foods. So to that end, we're back, but we're also going to take a new shape. So here we have PHP Cape Town, as it's been for quite some time. They're doing some great stuff there too. And we are partnering up, and we are starting PHP South Africa. So it's going to be more of the same with new stuff, all the good peeps combining forces, making this awesome new organization. We're going to do meetups. We're going to do the same raffles. We're going to have now 2 meetups worth of resources to do all the great stuff we do and expand further. So we have a very basic site up right now. It's literally just an iframe to a Google form where you can sign up for some more info when we have it available, and that is at phpsouthafrica.org. So please sign up. We're not going to use it to sell your data or leak privacy stuff. We just want to keep you informed if you're curious about it. So thank you to everyone who has stayed on the stream so far. And now I will do the raffle. So just before that, like it says there, contact methods will be Cape Town PHP on Twitter, CPT PHP, and on ztech.co.za. If you're not on ztech, please join us there. It's an awesome Slack community. There's tons of techies there. There's tons of resources on all things about life, not just tech. And it's an amazing place and an amazing community to be in. So, can I get a drum roll, please, gentlemen, while I raffle from our chat participants? Okay, so I think with that result, I can safely say our winner for the raffle for the JetBrains license is Abdullah. So congratulations. I will be in touch. I will post the links in chat. And yeah. Did I have more slides? No, that was it. So thank you very much for joining, everyone. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the talks. It's been a great time. I've appreciated the participation today. And we'll see you guys in the next one. It's a ciao for now from me.
Awesome. Have a great evening, all. See you around.
Jesus, bro. Okay.